Chapter 2. Two Faces. Feeling the need of fresh air and quiet after the strain of the last half hour, Ralph climbs the few steps leading from the laboratory to the roof, and sits down on the bench leading beneath the revolving aerial. The hum of the great city comes faintly from below. Aeroflyers dot the sky. From time to time, transoceanic or transcontinental airliners pass with a low vibration, scarcely audible. At times, a great aircraft will come close, within 500 yards perhaps, when the passengers will crane their necks to get a good view of home, if such it could be called. Indeed, his house, which is a round tower 650 feet high and 30 in diameter, built entirely of crystal glass bricks and stellonium, was one of the sights of New York. A grateful city, recognizing his genius and his benefits to humanity, has erected the tower for him on a plot where centuries ago Union Square has been. The top of the tower is twice as great in circumference as the main building, and in the upper part is located the research lab. Famous throughout the world, an electromagnetic tube elevator runs down the tower on one side of the building, all the rooms being circular in shape except for the space taken up by the elevator. Ralph, sitting on the roof of his tower, is oblivious to all about him. He is unable to dismiss from his mind the lovely face of the girl whose life he has just been the means of saving. The soft tones of her voice are in his ears. Heretofore engrossed in his work, his scientific mind has been oblivious to women. They have played no part in his life. Science has been his mistress, and a lab his home. And now, in one short half-hour for him, the whole world has become a new place. Two dark eyes, a bewitching pair of lips, a voice that has stirred the very core of his being. Ralph shakes himself. It is not for him to think of these things, he tells himself, but he is but a tool to advance science, to benefit humanity. He belongs not to himself, but to the government who feed and clothe him, and whose doctors guard his health with every precaution. He has to pay the penalty of his plus sign. To be sure, he has everything, but he has to ask, and his wish is law, if it does not interfere with his work. There are times he grows restive under the restraint. He longs to smoke tobacco forbidden him by watchful doctors, and then to indulge in those little vices which vary the monotony of existence for the ordinary individual. There are times when he most ardently wishes that he were an ordinary individual. He is not allowed to make dangerous tests personally, therefore endangering a life invaluable to the government. That institution would supply him with some criminal under sentence of death who would be compelled to undergo the test for him. If the criminal were killed during the experiment, nothing was lost. If he did not perish, he would be imprisoned for life. Being a true scientist, Ralph wanted to make his own dangerous experiments. Not to do this took away the very spice of life for him, and on occasion he rebelled. He would call up the planet governor, the ruler of 15 billion human beings, and demand that he be relieved of his work. "I can't stand it," he would protest. "This constraint which I am forced to endure maddens me. I feel that I am being hampered." The governor, a wise man and a kindly one, would often call upon him in person, and for a long time they would discuss the question, Ralph protesting, the governor reasoning with him. "I am nothing but a prisoner," Ralph stormed once. "You are a great inventor," smiles the governor, "and a tremendous factor in the world's advancement. You are invaluable to humanity, and you are irreplaceable. You belong to the world, not to yourself." Many times in the past few years, he recalled, had the two been over the same ground, and many times had the diplomatic governor convinced the scientist that in sacrifice of self and devotion to the world's future lay his great reward. The voice of his manservant interrupts his reverie. "Sir," he says, "your presence in the transmission room would be appreciated." "What is it?" asked the scientist, impatient at the interruption. "Sir, the people have heard all about Switzerland incident of an hour ago and desire to show their appreciation." "Well, I suppose I must submit," the inventor rather wearily responds, and both step over into the round steel car of the electromagnetic elevator. The butler presses one of the 28 ivory buttons, and the car shoots downward with neither noise nor friction. There are no cables or guides, the car being held and propelled by magnetism only. At the 22nd floor, the car stops and Ralph steps into the transmission room. No sooner has he entered than a deafening applause of hundreds of thousands of voices greet him, and he is forced to put his hands to his ears to muffle the sound. Yes, the transmission room is entirely empty. Every inch of the wall, however, is covered with large-sized telephones and loud-speaking devices. Centuries ago, when people tendered someone an ovation, they would all assemble in some great square or large hall. The celebrity would have to appear in person, else there would be no ovation. Truly a clumsy means. And then, too, in those years, people at a distance could neither see nor hear what was going on throughout the world. Ralph's ovation was the result of an enterprise of newspaper, which has extras about his exploit and urges the readers to connect with him at 5 p.m. Naturally, everyone can spare the time. It is called the teleservice company and asked to be connected with the inventor's trunk line, and this is the result. Ralph 124C41 Plus steps into the middle of the room and bows to the 4 points of the compass in order that all might see him perfectly. The noise is deafening, and as it rather grows in volume than diminishing, he beseechingly holds up his hands. In a few seconds, the applause ceases, and someone cries, "Speech! Speech!" Ralph speaks briefly, thanking his audience for their interest, and touching cut lightly upon his rescue of the young Swiss girl, begs his hearers to remember that in no way has he risked his life, and therefore can scarcely be called a hero. Vociferous cries of "No, no," tell him that no one shares his humble opinion of the achievement. It is at this juncture that Ralph's attention is caught by two persons in the audience. There are so many thousands of faces on each plate that nearly every countenance is blurred due to their constant movement. He himself, however, is clearly seen by them, as each one has switched on their reversers, making it possible to see only the object at the end of the line. To Ralph, the shifting clouds appearances of his audience is commonplace. This is not the first time that he has been called upon to receive the thanks of the multitude for some unusual service he has rendered them, or some surprising scientific feat he has successfully accomplished. While realizing that he must of a necessity yield to public adulation, it more or less bores him. He is not particularly interested in the crowd, either collectively or individually, as there are so many faces crowded into each faceplate. He makes no attempt to distinguish friends from strangers. Yet there are two faces among the numerous telephone faceplates that Ralph is making in his brief speech finds his eyes returning to again and again. Each card occupies the whole of a respective faceplate, and while dissimilar in appearance, nevertheless are markedly alike in expression. It is as if they are studying this great picture of him. Ralph senses no animosity in their steady, almost hypnotic gaze, and yet they are curiously apart from the enthusiastic throng. He feels as though he are to both of them under a microscope. One of the faces is that of a man in his early 30s. It is a handsome face, though, to the close observer. The eyes are set a trifle too near together, and the mouth betrays cunning and has a touch of viciousness. The other is not a terrestrial, but a visiting Martian. It is impossible to mistake the distinctly Martian cast of countenance, the great black horse eyes and the long melancholy face. The elongated, slightly pointed ears are proof enough. Martians in New York are not sufficiently rare to excite any particular comment. Many made that city their permanent home, although the law on the planet Earth as well as on Mars forbids the intermarriage of Martians and terrestrials, so keeps them from flocking earthward in any great numbers. In the applause that follows the conclusion of Ralph's words, the incident of the two pairs of scrutinizing eyes vanishes from his thoughts, but his subconscious self, that marvelous mechanism which forgets nothing, has photographed them indelibly. With the plaudits of the crowd still ringing, he bows and leaves the room. He goes via the elevator directly to his library and asks for the afternoon news. His man hands him a tray on which lies a piece of material as large as a postage stamp, as transparent and flexible as celluloid. "What edition is this?" "The 5 o'clock, sir. New York news." Ralph takes the news and places it in a metal holder, which is part of the hinged door of a small box. He closes the door and turns on a switch on the side of the box. Immediately there appears on the opposite white wall of the room a 12-column page of the New York news, and the scientist, leaning back in his chair, proceeds to read. The New York News is simply a microscopic reduction of a page which, when enlarged by a powerful lens, becomes plainly visible. Moreover, each paper has 8 pages in separate sheets, as was the fashion centuries ago, but 8 pages literally on top of each other. The printing process is electrolytic, no ink whatsoever being used in the manufacture of the newspaper. This process was invented in 1910 by an Englishman and improved by the American 64L52 in 2031, who makes it possible to print in one operation 8 different subjects, one on top of another. These 8 impressions can be made visible only by subjecting the paper to different colors, the color rays bringing out the different prints. The 7 colors of the rainbow are used, while white light is employed to show reproduced photographs, etc., in their natural colors. With this method, it is possible to print a newspaper fully 10 times as large in volume as any newspaper of the 21st century on one piece of film the size of a postage stamp. Each stamp publishes an edition every 30 minutes, and if one did not possess a projector, one could read the paper by inserting the news in a holder beneath a powerful lens which one carries in one's pocket, folded when not in use. To lead the 8 different pages, a revolving color screen is placed directly underneath the lens to bring out the different colors necessary to read the paper. Ralph glances over the headlines of his news, sees that considerable space is given to the latest exploit, the paper showing actual photographs of the Swiss Alpine scene, which a correspondent has taken as the avalanche thunders down the mountain. The photographs have been sent to Teleradiograph immediately after the occurrence in Switzerland, and the news has printed them in all the natural colors 20 minutes after Ralph has turned off the ultra power in New York. These photographs seem to be the only thing that interests Ralph, as they show the house and the surrounding Alps. These, with the monstrous avalanche in progression photographed and reproduced in the natural colors, are very impressive. Presently he revolves the color screen of his projector to green, the technical page of the news, to him the most interesting reading of the paper. He soon has read all that interests him, and as there is still an hour before dinner time, he begins to write his lecture on the prolongation of animal life by pi rays. He attaches a double leather headband to his head. At each end of the band is attached a round metal disc that presses closely on the temples. From each metal disc, an insulated wire leads to a small square box, the menograph, or mind writer. He then presses a button, and a low humming is heard. Simultaneously, 2 small bulbs begin to glow with a soft green fluorescent light. Grasping a button connected with a flexible cord to the menograph, he leans back in his chair. After a few minutes' reflection, he presses the button, and at once a wave line traced in ink appears on a narrow white fabric band, the latter resembling a telegraph recorder tape. The band, which moves rapidly, is unrolled from one reel and rolled up on another. Whenever the inventor wishes to write down his thoughts, he will press the button, which starts the mechanism as well as the recorder tracing. Where the wave line breaks, a new word or sentence commences. The menograph is one of Ralph 124C41 Plus's earliest inventions and entirely superseded the pen and pencil. It is only necessary to press the button when an idea is to be recorded and to release the button when one merely reflected and did not wish the thought words recorded. Instead of writing a letter, one sends the recorded menotape, and inasmuch as the Meno alphabet is universal, can be read by anyone, children being taught it at an early age, it is considered that this invention of Ralph's is one of his greatest gifts to humanity. 20 times as much work can be done by means of the menograph as can be done by the old-fashioned writing, which required considerable physical effort. Typewriters soon disappeared after its invention, nor was there any use for stenographers, as the thoughts were written down direct on the tape, which was sent out just as a letter is sent centuries ago. As is his custom in the evening, he works for some hours in the laboratory and retires at midnight. Before he falls asleep, he attaches to his head a double leather headband with metal temple plates similar to the one used in connection with the menograph. He then calls for his man, Peter, and tells him to put on Homer's Odyssey for the night. Peter goes down to the library on the 15th floor and takes down from his shelf a narrow box labeled Odyssey, Homer. From this he extracts a large but thin reel on which is wound a long, narrow film. This film is entirely black, but for a white transparent wave line running through the center of it. Peter returns to Ralph's bedroom and places the reel containing the film in a rack and introduces the end of the film into the hypnobioscope. This wonderful instrument invented by Ralph transmits the impulses of the wave line direct to the brain of the sleeping inventor, who thus is made to dream the Odyssey. It has been known for centuries that the brain can be affected during sleep by certain processes. Thus, one can be forced to dream that a heavy object is lying on one's chest, if such an object is placed on the sleeper's chest, or one can be forced to dream that one's hand is being burnt or frozen simply by heating or cooling the sleeper's hand. It remains to Ralph, however, to perfect the hypnobioscope, which transmits words direct to the sleeping brain, in such a manner that everything can be remembered in detail the next morning. This is made possible by having the impulses act directly and steadily on the brain. In other words, it is the menograph reversed with certain additions. Thus, while in a passive state, the mind absorbs the impressions quite readily and mechanically, and a story read by means of the hypnobioscope leaves as much stronger impression than if the same story has been read while conscious. For thousands of years, humanity has wasted half of its life during sleep, the negative life. Since Ralph's invention, all this has changed. No one night is lost by anyone, if anywhere possible, conditions permitting. All books are read while one sleeps. Most of the studying is done while one sleeps, and some people master 10 languages during the sleep's life. Children who cannot be successfully taught in school during the hours of consciousness become good scholars if the lessons are repeated during their sleep life. The morning newspapers are transmitted to the sleeping subscribers by wire at about 5 a.m. The great newspaper offices have hundreds of hypnobioscopes in the operation, the subscribers' wire leading to them. The newspaper office notifies by each subscriber which kind of news is desirable, furnishes only such news. Consequently, when the subscriber wakes up for breakfast, he already knows the latest news and can discuss it with his family, the members of which are also connected with the newspaper hypnobioscope. End of chapter 2.